When you hear Hell's Angels, your mind probably fills with roaring engines, leather jackets, and headlines soaked in fear. But what if I told you there's another side? A quieter one that almost no one talks about. A side filled with kindness, compassion, and acts that defy every stereotype. Before we begin, tell us where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your every comment, gift, and membership helps us bring more heart-touching stories to your life. Flashes of police sirens, grainy news clips, and tabloid covers paint a single story. Hell's Angels as outlaws, menacing figures rolling into towns like storms. For decades, that was the only picture most people saw. Mothers pulled children closer. Shopkeepers lowered their gaze. A patch on the back meant trouble on the horizon. And yes, there were fights, chaos, and the kind of stories that made easy headlines. But what if those headlines, loud as they were, drowned out something quieter, gentler? Imagine chrome not as a weapon, but as a shield. Imagine engines rumbling not toward destruction, but toward protection. That's the paradox we're diving into. A brotherhood that lives in shadows, but sometimes steps unexpectedly into the light. Because behind the tattoos and the steel, behind the myths and the fear, there are moments so human, so tender, they might just leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Every December, in cities across America, the rumble begins. Not for a fight, not for a parade, but for children. The Hell's Angels Toys for Tots run has been a quiet tradition for years, though it rarely makes the evening news. Picture it: leather jackets covered in holiday pins, massive hands carrying teddy bears and rap dolls, bikes pulling up outside children's hospitals and community centers. The contrast is almost surreal. Skull patches alongside stuffed animals. For kids who thought Christmas would pass them by, the sight is overwhelming. Wide eyes, small hands reaching out, laughter echoing against the roar of idling engines. One mother in Oakland once said, tears in her eyes, "I never thought I'd see a biker kneel down to hand my son a gift he'd been begging for. But he did. And he smiled like he was the one receiving it." It's not a story of reputation. It's a story of presence. And on those days, the feared become the givers. It was the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. Streets in Houston were rivers. Families clung to rooftops, their homes shattered, belongings gone. Relief agencies were stretched thin. But then another sound. Not helicopters, not sirens, engines. Dozens of them. The Hell's Angels rolled in not with threats, but with supplies. Bottled water, tarps, generators lashed to bikes. Neighbors who once feared them now saw them hauling cases into shelters, carrying elderly residents through knee-deep water, lifting children onto their shoulders. One old man whispered to a reporter, "I used to cross the street when I saw them. Tonight, I crossed the street to hug one." The media, for once, caught the moment. A photograph spread online. A biker, drenched in rain, his tattooed arms wrapped gently around a grandmother as he carried her from her flooded home. No one could reconcile the image with the stereotype. But maybe that's the point. Some stories can't be reconciled. They just are. In a small town outside Spokane, a corner store was on the verge of shutting down. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Greene, had run it for 40 years. Rising rent, dwindling customers, and mounting bills pushed her to the edge. She planned to close quietly. But someone noticed. A man in a leather vest who'd stopped by for coffee and seen the final week sign. The next morning, the ground shook. Not with anger, but with solidarity. Dozens of bikes filled the lot. Each rider bought something: bread, milk, canned goods, and each one pressed extra cash into her hands. By noon, her shelves were empty. By evening, her bills were paid. Mrs. Greene cried behind the counter. "They didn't just save my store," she said later. "They reminded me I wasn't invisible." For a week, the townsfolk talked about it. Some shook their heads, others smiled. But everyone agreed. It wasn't what they expected from the Hell's Angels. There are stories you'll never see in papers, whispered only between neighbors. One winter night in Toronto, a teenage girl was being harassed walking home. Two men followed too close, their laughter sharp and cruel. Then came another sound, deep, guttural, growing louder. A line of motorcycles turned onto the street, their headlights spilling across the pavement. The men froze, then bolted into the shadows. The girl stood trembling until one of the riders, a woman with silver in her braid, shut off her bike and asked softly, "You okay?" The girl nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. The rider walked her home, saying nothing more than, "No one should walk scared." The next morning, the girl told her mother, who told her neighbor, and soon the story spread. No names, no patches, just the memory of an unexpected guardian. Sometimes kindness doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it rides in, does what needs to be done, and leaves without waiting for thanks. Children's hospitals are often places of quiet courage, where laughter feels out of place and time moves slowly. But one afternoon in Charlotte, something unusual happened. The ground trembled. Windows rattled. Nurses paused mid-shift as the roar of bikes filled the parking lot. The children pressed their faces to the glass, eyes wide with awe. When the riders walked in, leather vests worn like armor, the room fell silent. Then, one by one, they began kneeling, handing out toy trucks, coloring books, dolls. A boy named Ethan, battling leukemia, tugged on a biker's glove and whispered, "Will you be my friend?" The man swallowed hard, knelt lower, and nodded. For the next 2 hours, Ethan rode the hallways on the biker's shoulders, laughing for the first time in weeks. Doctors later said that moment lifted Ethan's spirit more than any medicine could. And when the bikers left, they didn't just leave toys behind. They left hope, heavy, real, and unforgettable. In a blue-collar town in Ohio, a single dad named Mark struggled to raise his daughter, Lily. He worked nights at the mill, slept in broken hours, and still fell behind on rent. One winter, he faced eviction. Lily's only request that Christmas was a second-hand guitar, something far out of reach. Mark's pride kept him silent, but neighbors talk and word spread. One evening, a group of bikers pulled up outside his trailer. Mark braced himself, thinking trouble had found him. Instead, one rider stepped forward, holding a case. Inside was a guitar, polished, tuned, perfect. Mark stammered, "I can't pay you." But the biker shook his head. "This isn't about money. It's about her smile." That Christmas morning, Lily strummed her first chord. Tears slid down Mark's face as he realized kindness had come from the least expected place. Years later, Lily played that same guitar on a stage at her college graduation. And Mark never forgot who gave her the chance. Loss has a way of hollowing a town. When firefighter James O'Connor died saving a family from a blaze in Arizona, the whole community grieved. His widow worried no one would show for the service. James had no family left, only his firehouse brothers. But when the church bells rang, a low thunder answered. Dozens of hell's angels arrived, their chrome glinting under the desert sun. They lined the streets, standing silent as the casket passed. Helmets removed, heads bowed. Afterward, one of them placed James's fire badge gently atop the coffin. Not a word was spoken. For the widow, it was overwhelming. She later said, "I thought I'd be alone. Instead, I had a wall of strangers who protected my grief." It wasn't about reputation. It wasn't about image. It was about honoring a man who gave his life for others. And in that moment, they weren't bikers. They were brothers. At a diner in Montana, an old veteran named Carl sat alone, his jacket threadbare, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had served 2 tours overseas, but now lived in near poverty, barely scraping by on disability checks. Most passed him by without a glance. One morning, a Hell's Angel walked in. He noticed Carl, noticed the patches sewn crookedly on his jacket. Without a word, he sat down across from him. They spoke quietly, heads bent, for almost an hour. When the biker left, Carl stayed behind, confused, until the waitress came over with a smile. "Your meals are covered for the year," she said, sliding a stack of prepaid receipts across the table. Carl's hands shook as he realized what had just happened. For the first time in years, someone had seen him, really seen him, and in that small diner, with sunlight breaking through the blinds, a man once forgotten was remembered. Sometimes the greatest kindness is wordless. A young woman named Claire had lost her brother in an accident. He had been her protector, her anchor, and now she walked with a shadow in her eyes. One night, while sitting on a park bench, she heard engines approach. 3 bikers stopped nearby, not intruding, just sitting quietly a few benches away. For nearly an hour, no one spoke. The sound of their bikes cooling filled the air like steady breathing. Finally, one of them stood, placed a single white rose on the bench beside her, and walked away. They never asked her name. They never returned. But Claire later told her therapist, "That was the first night I felt like I wasn't carrying my grief alone." Sometimes healing doesn't come from words. Sometimes it comes from presence, raw, imperfect, human. And sometimes that presence arrives on 2 wheels. A hurricane tore through Florida, leaving neighborhoods drowned in silence and debris. Rescue crews were stretched thin. In one shattered street, a single mother clutched her son on the roof of their flooded home, crying out for help. Hours passed, no boat, no siren, just water rising. Then came the sound, deep, growling engines on higher ground. A group of Hell's Angels had ridden into the storm, carrying ropes, makeshift rafts, supplies. One waded chest-deep into the current, reaching the stranded mother and boy. With strength that defied the water's pull, he lifted the child to safety. The mother wept as the biker wrapped the boy in his leather vest to keep him warm. She whispered, "Why are you doing this?" He simply replied, "Because no one else showed up." That moment was caught on a neighbor's phone. It spread online, not as outlaw infamy, but as proof that even in chaos, compassion rides in unexpected armor. In Vancouver, a man named Daniel had grown up in a rough neighborhood. He'd once been terrified of bikers, crossing the street when he saw their jackets. But one evening, his life collided with theirs forever. Daniel's little sister was attacked while walking home from work. When the bikers who knew the block heard, they stepped in, not with violence but with presence. They escorted her safely home every night for weeks, making sure no harm touched her again. Years later, Daniel visited a Hell's Angels clubhouse, holding his newborn daughter. He found one of the men who had once walked his sister home. "I just wanted to say thank you," Daniel said, his voice breaking. The biker looked down at the baby in Daniel's arms, then nodded. "We said we'd keep her safe. We keep our word." It was a simple promise. But for Daniel, it was everything. At a small-town wedding in Kansas, fear loomed. The bride's ex had threatened to disrupt the day. Her father, a retired mechanic, had once fixed bikes for a few Hell's Angels. When they heard about the threats, they showed up not loud, not wild, just present. As vows were spoken, the bride glanced to the back row. There, standing silently, were men in leather, arms folded, eyes watchful. Chrome bikes lined the churchyard like sentinels. The ex never came. After the ceremony, one biker quietly slipped away before the reception, but not before leaving an envelope on the gift table with just 3 words inside, "Every woman safe." The bride wept when she read it. That day, she didn't just gain a husband. She gained a sense of safety she thought she'd lost forever. Snow blanketed the streets of Detroit, muffling the world in white. Inside a shelter, children without homes pressed their noses to frosted windows, restless with the ache of absence. Then, faint at first, came the sound of engines. One by one, Hell's Angels filled the street, red bags slung over their shoulders. Inside, toys, warm coats, books. They handed them out gently, laughing with the children, letting them climb onto the bikes parked in the snow. For a few magical hours, those kids weren't homeless. They were fearless riders, free under the winter sky. Later, a little girl tugged at one biker's sleeve. "Are you Santa?" she asked. He paused, smiled softly, and said, "No, sweetheart. I just work for him sometimes." The shelter director swore that night gave those children something no gift could match: the memory that someone thought they mattered. And so, the stories pile up: a hospital visit, a Christmas ride, a rescue in a storm, a guitar for a little girl. Each moment small, each moment mighty. Acts of kindness hidden beneath vests patched with fire and steel. The world may see only the outlaw image, the noise, the shadows, the myths. But if you look closer, you'll see something else. Hands that lift, voices that comfort, presence that protects. Maybe that's the lesson. Compassion doesn't wear a uniform. It roars in unexpected places, on two wheels, in silence, in the simple choice to care. So the next time you hear engines in the distance, don't just think of fear. Think of the father who got his daughter a guitar, the widow who wasn't left alone, the child who found laughter in a hospital hallway. Because kindness wears leather, too. Thank you for watching. If the story moved you, please subscribe, like, and press the bell icon, so you won't miss the next story in this powerful series. Trust me, the journey has only just begun, and the next one might change the way you see the world forever.